London was having one of those perfect summer days, the kind that brings tourists flocking to Buckingham Palace in droves. The sky was bright blue with just a few fluffy clouds, and a gentle breeze kept everyone comfortable despite the warm sunshine. By mid-morning, hundreds of visitors had already gathered along the fence outside the palace. They stood shoulder to shoulder, cameras ready, waiting for the famous changing of the guard ceremony. The excitement in the air was almost touchable as people from all corners of the world chatted in different languages, all sharing the same eager anticipation. Among the sea of visitors stood the Taylor family, James, Elizabeth, and their 8-year-old daughter Sophie. They had traveled all the way from Manchester for this special trip. Sophie bounced on her toes, trying to see over the heads of the adults in front of her. Her small hands clutched her beloved teddy bear, a worn brown stuffed animal she had named Brave. "Can you see anything yet, sweetheart?" James asked, putting a gentle hand on Sophie's shoulder. He noticed how thin it felt beneath her colorful sundress, a reminder of everything their family had been through in recent months. "Not yet, Daddy," Sophie replied, her voice still carrying that bubbling excitement despite everything. Will they really not smile no matter what? Elizabeth bent down beside her daughter, adjusting the bright yellow scarf that covered Sophie's head where her curls had once been. That's right. The guards are famous for their discipline. They stand perfectly still and don't react to anything happening around them. It's quite impressive. Sophie looked down at her teddy bear. "Did you hear that, Brave? We have to be extra quiet and good." The bear had been Sophie's constant companion through 6 grueling months of hospital visits, doctor appointments, and finally, her first full round of chemotherapy treatments. This trip to London was a celebration, a reward for finishing that first difficult milestone in her treatment. "Look! They're coming!" Someone in the crowd shouted, and a ripple of excitement passed through the gathered tourists. The faint sound of drums and brass instruments grew louder as the ceremony began. Sophie's eyes widened as she saw the guards in their bright red uniforms and tall black bearskin hats marching in perfect unison. "They look like they're from a storybook," she whispered to her mother, who nodded and snapped a photo. The family managed to secure a spot close to the ceremonial rope, giving Sophie a perfect view as the guards took their positions. One guard stood particularly close to them, a tall man with a strong jaw and eyes that stared straight ahead, seeing everything and nothing all at once. "That's William Thornton," a nearby tour guide told his group quietly. "Been a guard for 7 years. Never once broken character. They say he once stood through a thunderstorm without blinking." Sophie studied the guard with fascination. "He looks like a statue," she told Brave, holding the teddy bear up for a better view. As the ceremony continued, the crowd pressed forward slightly, eager to capture the perfect photo. Sophie, small and light on her feet, was accidentally bumped from behind. She stumbled forward a step, and in that moment, Brave slipped from her fingers. The teddy bear tumbled through the air in what seemed like slow motion, landing with a soft plop just inches from Guard William's polished black boots. "Oh no!" Sophie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her parents reached for her, but it was too late to catch the fallen bear. A hush fell over their section of the crowd as everyone realized what had happened. Sophie's hospital bracelet caught the sunlight as she reached helplessly toward the rope barrier. "Brave," she called softly, her voice trembling. That bear had been with her through every needle, every scan, every night she'd cried herself to sleep in the hospital. Guard William remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed ahead as he had been trained to do. But something flickered in those eyes, something only someone watching very closely might notice. The guard had seen the bear fall. He had heard the little girl's voice. And though no one in the crowd could possibly know it, under that tall bearskin hat and behind that perfect military posture, William Thornton was making the biggest decision of his 7-year career. The crowd held its breath, wondering what would happen next. Sophie's parents exchanged worried glances, knowing how important Brave was to their daughter. And Guard William, still as a statue, fought an internal battle between duty and something else, something that stirred inside him as he caught a glimpse of the little girl, with the yellow head scarf and hospital bracelet, reaching for her fallen friend. Behind the stern face of Guard William Thornton was a man with his own story, one that the crowds of tourists could never guess. At 29 years old, William had served in the Queen's Guard for 7 years, earning respect from his fellow guardsmen for his unwavering discipline. His commanding officers often used him as an example for new recruits, pointing out his perfect posture and ability to stand motionless for hours regardless of weather or distractions. Thornton could stand through a hurricane without blinking, the senior guards would tell the rookies. Once a seagull landed on his hat and he didn't even twitch. William took pride in his role, understanding that he represented centuries of tradition. Growing up in a small town near Liverpool, he had dreamed of wearing the famous red uniform since he was a boy. His father, a factory worker with a deep love of British history, had taken him to see the changing of the Guard when William was just 10 years old. "That's what real discipline looks like, son," his father had told him. "That's the backbone of our country right there." Those words had stuck with William through the grueling training, through the blistering hot days in summer when sweat ran down his back under the heavy uniform, and through the freezing winter mornings when his toes went numb inside his polished boots. Not once in 7 years had he broken character during duty. But this past week had tested William's resolve in ways military training never could. His younger brother Tom, just 22 years old and fresh out of university, had been diagnosed with leukemia. William had been there when the doctor delivered the news, had seen his little brother's face go pale, had watched their parents try to hold themselves together. "We'll start treatment immediately," the doctor had said, her voice gentle but serious. "It's going to be a difficult road, but there's reason to be hopeful." William had requested personal leave, but with 3 other guards already out sick, his commanding officer could only offer him a few days. So here he was, back on duty, standing perfectly still outside Buckingham Palace, while his mind raced with thoughts of hospital rooms and medical terms he'd never wanted to learn. Just yesterday, he'd visited Tom in the hospital. His brother's room was in the children's cancer ward because the adult ward was full. William had walked past rooms filled with young patients, some with parents reading them stories, others playing with stuffed animals despite tubes and machines connected to their small bodies. The sight had shaken him more than any military drill ever had. "It's not so bad," Tom had told him, trying to smile though his face was already showing signs of the treatments. "The nurses here are nice, and look what they gave me." He'd held up a brown teddy bear wearing a tiny t-shirt that read "Brave Fighter." "Apparently every patient gets one. Bit childish, but I kind of like the little guy." William had teased his brother about the bear, but he'd noticed how Tom's fingers clutched it when the conversation turned to upcoming treatments. That bear had stayed right beside Tom, even when he'd drifted off to sleep. Now, standing at attention outside the palace, William fought to keep his mind focused on his duty rather than on his brother's hospital bed. It was particularly difficult today, with so many families in the crowd. Children pointing, parents lifting little ones onto shoulders for a better view. Every family reminded him of his own. William fixed his gaze straight ahead, his face a perfect mask of military discipline. Years of training had taught him to notice everything while appearing to see nothing. From the corner of his eye, he could spot potential security issues while never moving his head. Today, he noticed a little girl with a yellow headscarf standing with her parents near the rope barrier. Something about her caught his attention, perhaps the way her parents hovered protectively, or maybe the hospital bracelet on her thin wrist. He saw her excitement, her wonder at the ceremony, the way she talked to her teddy bear just like Tom talked to his. William maintained his stance, but something inside him softened slightly. That's when he heard the crowd gasp, saw the flash of movement, and spotted the teddy bear landing just inches from his boots. William's mind raced behind his impassive expression. The rules were absolute: never break character, never move from position without orders, never interact with the public during ceremonial duty. These rules had been drilled into him for years. Breaking them could mean discipline, even removal from the prestigious guards. But as he heard the little girl's distressed voice calling for her bear, as he caught sight of her hospital bracelet again, William thought of his brother alone in the hospital, clutching his own teddy bear for comfort. In that moment, standing perfectly still as he'd been trained to do, Guard William Thornton faced a choice between the duty he'd sworn to uphold and something else, something that spoke to his heart rather than his training. The teddy bear lay on the ground, just inches from Guard William's polished black boots. A hushed silence fell over the crowd as everyone realized what had happened. Tourists lowered their cameras, their attention shifting from the ceremony to the small drama unfolding before them. Little Sophie stood frozen behind the rope barrier, her eyes wide with worry. That bear wasn't just any toy. It had been with her through every doctor's appointment, every scary night in the hospital, every painful treatment. Her mom had sewn a special pocket inside it, where Sophie kept a small photo of her family, a reminder that she was never alone, even during the scariest parts of her treatment. "Brave," she whispered again, her voice catching. Her father put a comforting hand on her shoulder, but the look on Sophie's face made it clear that nothing could replace that particular teddy bear. Guard William remained perfectly still, as he had been trained to do. His eyes stared straight ahead, his face showing no reaction. But inside, his thoughts were racing. The rules were crystal clear on this point. Nothing was to disrupt the ceremony, and guards were never, under any circumstances, to break character while on duty. Just last month, a fellow guard had been formally reprimanded when he briefly shifted his weight during a 2-hour standing post on a sweltering day. The Queen's Guard prided themselves on their discipline. It was what made them special, what tourists traveled from around the world to see. Yet something about the little girl's voice tugged at William's heart. From the corner of his eye, he could see her hospital bracelet catching the sunlight. It was identical to the one his brother Tom wore, same color, same hospital logo. In that moment, William saw his brother in the little girl's face, in her brave attempt not to cry, in the way she looked at that fallen teddy bear as if it were her best friend in the world. The crowd waited, holding their breath. Some people whispered to each other, wondering what would happen. A few feet away, William's fellow guard, Robert, maintained his position, staring straight ahead as regulations required. 7 years of perfect service flashed through William's mind. 7 years without a single mistake. His commanding officer had even mentioned him as being in line for a promotion next month. Breaking character now could jeopardize all of that. But then William remembered yesterday's visit to his brother. He had arrived to find Tom curled up in his hospital bed, face pale from his first treatment, clutching his own teddy bear while he slept. The nurse had seen William's surprise at the sight of his grown brother with a stuffed toy. "It helps more than you might think," she told him quietly. "Sometimes when the treatments get tough, or when family can't be here, having something to hold on to makes all the difference. It's not just for kids, you know." In that hospital room, William had picked up his brother's bear when it fell from the bed, tucking it gently back beside Tom without a second thought. And now another bear had fallen, this one belonging to a little girl who clearly needed it just as much as his brother needed his. Seconds ticked by, feeling like hours. Sophie's parents exchanged worried glances, unsure of what to do. The crowd watched, cameras now trained on the guard and the fallen teddy bear instead of the ceremonial proceedings. Then, in a movement so unexpected it drew gasps from the onlookers, Guard William Thornton broke his stance. His head turned slightly toward the fallen bear, then down at it. The movement was small, but in the context of the Queen's Guard's famous immobility, it was shocking. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People nudged each other, pointing. Some raised their phones higher, sensing something unusual was happening. William could feel the eyes of his fellow guards, could almost hear their thoughts. "What are you doing?" "Hold position." But William wasn't thinking about them anymore. With a smooth, deliberate motion that defied 7 years of training and centuries of tradition, he bent down and picked up Sophie's teddy bear. The crowd's murmur turned into astonished exclamations, and the clicking of camera shutters intensified. William turned toward the barrier where Sophie stood. Her eyes widened in surprise, her mouth forming a perfect O of astonishment. For a moment, guard and child looked at each other, the disciplined soldier and the brave little patient, connected by something deeper than ceremony or tradition. With careful movements, William extended his white-gloved hand, offering the teddy bear back to its rightful owner. As Sophie reached to take it, her hospital bracelet was clearly visible, the name of the Children's Cancer Ward printed in bold letters, the same ward where Tom was fighting his own battle. "Thank you," Sophie said, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. Her smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. William did something then that shocked the crowd even more than his breaking formation. His stern expression softened, and the corners of his mouth turned up in the smallest of smiles, brief, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. In that tiny gesture, he acknowledged not just Sophie, but every brave fighter facing battles that required more courage than any guard-duby ever could. Then, as quickly as he had broken character, William returned to his position. Back straight, eyes forward, face once again an impassive mask of military discipline. But something had changed. The crowd knew it, his fellow guards knew it, and from the warm feeling in his chest, William knew it too. The moment Guard William handed the teddy bear back to Sophie seemed to stretch in time. Their eyes met briefly, but in that short connection, something powerful passed between them, a recognition, an understanding that went beyond words. Sophie clutched Brave close to her chest, her eyes shining with gratitude as William resumed his position. What the crowd couldn't know was how deeply that moment had affected them both. As William stood at attention, his face once again an unreadable mask, his mind was filled with thoughts of his brother Tom. The hospital bracelet on Sophie's wrist had been identical to Tom's, not just from the same hospital, but from the exact same children's cancer ward. Ward 7B, where young fighters battled illnesses too big for their small bodies. Sophie's mom Elizabeth bent down and whispered, "What do you say, Sophie?" "Thank you," Sophie called out, her voice clear and bright despite the murmurs of the crowd. She held up Brave so the teddy bear could see the guard properly. "Brave says thank you too." William couldn't respond, of course. He was already pushing the boundaries of protocol by having moved at all. But something in his eyes softened momentarily, a flicker of acknowledgement that only Sophie seemed to notice. Elizabeth pulled out her phone and snapped a quick photo of Sophie holding Brave up toward the guard. She wanted to remember this moment, not just because a royal guard had broken character, but because of the pure joy on her daughter's face. It had been too long since she'd seen Sophie look so delighted. "Did you see that?" People in the crowd whispered to each other. "He actually moved." "Never seen anything like it in 20 years of coming here." An older man with a British accent told his wife. "I got it all on video," a tourist said excitedly, tapping at his phone. "This is going viral for sure." As the ceremony continued, Sophie couldn't take her eyes off William. She tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, he has a brother at my hospital," she said with the absolute certainty only children can muster. James looked down at his daughter in surprise. "How could you possibly know that, sweetheart?" Sophie shrugged, hugging Brave closer. "I just know. I saw it in his eyes. Like how Dr. Chen can tell when I'm scared even when I say I'm not. Children often have a way of seeing things adults miss." Sophie couldn't explain it, but in that brief moment when William had handed Brave back to her, she had sensed his worry, his concern for someone who mattered deeply to him. Someone who was fighting the same battle she was. What Sophie didn't know was that she was right. William's brother Tom was indeed in the same hospital, in the same ward, battling the same enemy that Sophie faced each day with Brave by her side. Tom had been admitted just 3 weeks ago, and the family was still reeling from the diagnosis. As the Taylors watched the remainder of the ceremony, Elizabeth noticed something about Sophie's bear. "Sophie, what's that?" she asked, pointing to a small pin now attached to Brave's ear, a tiny replica of a guard's bearskin hat. Sophie looked down in surprise. "I don't know. It wasn't there before." James examined it closely. "It's a Royal Guard pin. But how did it get there?" The answer was simple, though none of them had noticed the sleight of hand. In the moment William had returned the bear, his white-gloved fingers had quickly pinned the small token to the teddy bear's ear. It was a pin he usually kept inside his uniform, a gift from his brother, when William had first joined the Queen's Guard. Tom had given it to him saying, "Keep this with you, so part of me is standing guard too." William had carried it every day since. Yesterday, Tom had told him to give it to someone special, someone who needed its strength more than William did now. "It will find the right person," Tom had said from his hospital bed, his voice weak but his eyes determined. "You'll know who." And somehow, William had known. The moment he'd seen Sophie's hospital bracelet, the way she looked at her teddy bear with such love, he knew this was who Tom had meant. Meanwhile, Sophie's parents were still puzzling over the mysterious pin. Elizabeth took another photo of it to show Sophie's doctors and nurses. They'd been encouraging the family to find moments of joy and meaning during treatment. This certainly qualified. "It's magic," Sophie declared, touching the tiny pin with wonder. "Brave is even braver now." As the tailors prepared to leave after the ceremony, Sophie took one last look at William. Though he hadn't moved again, hadn't given any sign that anything unusual had happened, she raised Brave in a little salute. "We'll be brave together," she whispered to her bear, but her words seemed meant for the guard as well. What Sophie couldn't see was how William's heart tightened in his chest at her words. How, beneath the stoic exterior, he was making a silent promise to tell Tom about the little girl with the yellow scarf and the teddy bear named Brave. How sometimes the strongest connections come from the smallest moments of humanity. The tailors walked away, unaware that the simple act of returning a teddy bear would soon connect two families fighting the same battle in ways they couldn't yet imagine. By evening, videos of William's moment with Sophie had spread across the internet like wildfire. A tourist from America had captured the entire exchange in perfect clarity: the teddy bear falling, the guard breaking position, the small smile, and Sophie's delighted face as she received Brave back. The video was being shared thousands of times each hour, with comments pouring in from around the world. "This made me cry. Some rules are meant to be broken. That guard deserves a medal, not punishment. The way he smiled at her, my heart can't take it." William didn't know about any of this as he completed his shift and returned to the guard's quarters. He was preparing himself for the consequences of his actions. Breaking character during ceremonial duty was a serious offense. Guards had been demoted for less. "Thornton, Captain wants to see you." Now, the message came from another guard as William was changing out of his ceremonial uniform. He nodded, his face giving nothing away, though his stomach tightened. This was it, the moment he'd have to explain himself. As he walked to Captain Harold's office, William didn't regret what he'd done. He'd do it again in a heartbeat. Still, 7 years of perfect service potentially thrown away for one moment of compassion. It was a lot to process. Captain Harold was a career military man with 30 years of service. His office walls were covered with photographs of him standing alongside royalty and world leaders. He believed in tradition, in rules, in the sacred duty of the Queen's Guard to represent the unwavering discipline of Britain's finest. "Close the door, Thornton," Captain Harold said, not looking up from the papers on his desk. William did as instructed and stood at attention, waiting. "I understand there was an incident during your watch today." "Yes, sir." "You broke formation." "Yes, sir." "You interacted with a member of the public." "Yes, sir." Captain Harold finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "And you smiled." William swallowed hard. "Briefly, sir, yes." The captain picked up his phone and turned it around, showing William the viral video that was now playing on news websites around the world. "Care to explain?" For the first time in his career, William spoke freely to his commanding officer. "My brother Tom was diagnosed with leukemia 3 weeks ago, sir. He's in the Children's Cancer Ward at St. Matthew's Hospital. The little girl, she had the same hospital bracelet, same ward, and her teddy bear. Tom has one just like it. The hospital gives them to patients. They call them Courage Bears." William paused, then added, "I know it's not an excuse, sir. I accept whatever disciplinary action you deem appropriate." Captain Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked William even more than the day's events. He smiled, a small, tight smile, but a smile nonetheless. "My daughter had leukemia when she was 9, he said quietly. "Diagnosed right before Christmas. Toughest year of my life." William blinked in surprise. In 7 years, he'd never heard the captain mention having a daughter. "She's 22 now. In university. Healthy." The captain stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the palace grounds. "She had a stuffed rabbit. Wouldn't go to a single treatment without it." William remained silent, unsure how to respond to this unexpected turn in the conversation. "The royal family has been informed of the incident," Captain Harold continued, his tone becoming official again. "As has the Minister of Defense." William's heart sank. This had gone all the way to the top. Normally, this would result in a formal reprimand, possibly demotion. The captain turned back to face him. However, given the unique circumstances and the public response, things are being handled differently. "Sir, the public relations team is being flooded with calls. News networks from around the world want to interview the guard with a heart." The palace switchboard crashed from the volume of calls from people wanting to express support. William could hardly believe what he was hearing. More importantly, the captain continued, the royal family received this email an hour ago. He'd handed William a printed email from Elizabeth Taylor, Sophie's mother. The message was simple but powerful. It explained Sophie's cancer journey, how the trip to London had been a reward for completing her first round of chemotherapy, and how the God's act of kindness had been a moment of pure magic in a very difficult time. The email ended with, "Your God didn't just return a teddy bear today. He returned a piece of my daughter's courage. For that, our family will be forever grateful." William read it twice, his throat tight with emotion. "There's more," Captain Harold said, pulling out his phone and showing William a social media post from St. Matthew's Hospital. The children's cancer ward had shared a photo of several young patients holding teddy bears, all giving a salute to the kind God who showed that compassion is the greatest strength of all. Among the children in the photo was Tom, William's brother, smiling weakly but proudly at the camera, his hospital bracelet clearly visible. "Your brother," Captain Harold said, nodding at the screen. "Yes, sir. How did you?" "The hospital contacted us after making the connection. Apparently, he's been telling everyone his brother is the famous guard from the video." For the first time that day, William felt tears threatening to form. He blinked them back quickly, but not before the captain noticed. "The official position," Captain Harold said, returning to his formal tone, "is that while the Queen's Guard maintains the highest standards of ceremonial discipline, we also recognize the importance of compassion in exceptional circumstances." William nodded, trying to process everything. "There will be no disciplinary action, Thornton. Instead, you're being asked to participate in a special visit to St. Matthew's Hospital next week. In uniform. The royal family thinks it would be good for morale." "I thank you, sir." Captain Harold nodded, then added in a softer voice, "Sometimes, Thornton, the most important rules aren't in any military handbook." As William left the office, his phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Your brother saw you on the news. He hasn't smiled like that in weeks. Whatever trouble you're in, it was worth it." And William knew, in his heart, that it absolutely was. The children's ward of St. Matthew's Hospital was buzzing with excitement. Nurses hung colorful streamers in the recreation room, and volunteers arranged chairs in a circle. Today wasn't just any day, it was the day Guard William Thornton would visit. The story of the Royal Guard who broke character to return a little girl's teddy bear had touched hearts around the world, but nowhere more deeply than here, where both Sophie and William's brother Tom were patients. "Is he really coming in his uniform?" asked a small boy with a blue knit cap covering his head. "That's what I heard," replied a nurse as she tacked a poster to the wall. "The big red coat and everything." Tom sat in a wheelchair by the window, looking both excited and nervous. He'd been having a rough week with his treatments, but had insisted on being part of today's event. His mother fussed around him, adjusting his blanket and making sure his own teddy bear was positioned perfectly on his lap. "Will would kill me if he knew I brought this," Tom joked weakly, patting the bear. At 22, he sometimes felt childish carrying a stuffed animal. But on the hardest days of treatment, when everything hurt and fear threatened to overwhelm him, that bear was a solid comfort no one could take away. "Your brother understands better than most," his mother said softly, squeezing his shoulder. Meanwhile, in another part of the hospital, Sophie was getting ready too. Her parents had brought her favorite yellow dress, the one with sunflowers all around the hem, and her mom was tying a matching yellow scarf around Sophie's head. "Do you think he'll remember me?" Sophie asked, clutching Brave tightly. The little guard's hat pin still adorned the bear's ear, polished to a shine for the special occasion. "Of course he will," her father assured her. "You two had a pretty special moment. And half the world has seen it," her mother added with a smile, showing Sophie her phone. The video had now been viewed millions of times, with news stories about it appearing in dozens of countries. "You're both famous." Sophie didn't care much about being famous. What mattered to her was seeing the kind guard again, the one who had understood how important Brave was without her having to explain it. At precisely 2 o'clock, a hush fell over the children's ward recreation room. The door opened and William stepped in, resplendent in his full ceremonial uniform, red coat, black bearskin hat and all. Behind him stood Captain Harold, also in uniform, carrying a large gift bag. The children gasped and whispered. Several parents discreetly wiped away tears. William looked so tall, so official in the small hospital room with its cartoon-painted walls and child-sized furniture. For a moment, William maintained his professional guard stance, back straight, face serious, eyes forward. Then, deliberately, he broke into a warm smile and removed his towering bearskin hat. "Hello, everyone," he said, his voice gentle in a way that surprised those who had expected a booming military tone. "I'm very happy to meet you all." The children clapped excitedly. William's eyes scanned the room until they landed on two people: Sophie, sitting with her parents near the front, and Tom, in his wheelchair by the window. Captain Harold stepped forward. "On behalf of the Queen's Guard, we're honored to be here today. We've brought something special for each of you." He held up the gift bag, which William took and began distributing its contents: small teddy bears, each wearing a miniature guard's uniform complete with red coat and black hat. As William handed out the bears, he stopped at Sophie's chair. Their eyes met, and both smiled in recognition. "Hello again," William said, kneeling down to her level. "I believe we've met before." Sophie nodded eagerly. "You saved Brave," she said, holding up her teddy bear with its special pin. "He's been telling all the other teddies about it." William chuckled. "Well, I'm very glad to see you both again." He handed her one of the special guard teddy bears. "Now Brave has a friend to help stand guard while you sleep." Sophie's face lit up as she introduced the new bear to Brave. "They can be brave together," she declared. William then made his way to Tom's wheelchair. The brothers' eyes met, filled with everything they didn't need to say out loud. "Decided to dress up for me, did you?" Tom joked, his voice thin but his eyes bright with pride. "Only the best for my little brother," William replied, his voice thick with emotion as he handed Tom one of the guard bears. Tom accepted it, placing it next to his original bear. "Now I have two guardians," he said. What happened next wasn't planned. Sophie, watching the exchange, suddenly stood up and walked over to Tom's wheelchair. "Is this your brother?" she asked William, studying Tom carefully. William nodded. "Yes, this is my brother Tom." Sophie looked between them, then held out Brave toward Tom. "Your brother saved my bear. Brave helps me be strong during the yucky medicine days. Maybe he can help you too sometimes." The room went quiet. Even the nurses paused in their tasks, watching this unexpected moment unfold. Tom looked at the little girl with wonder, then at her offered teddy bear. "That's very kind," he said gently. "But Brave belongs with you. He's your special friend." Sophie considered this, then nodded seriously. She reached up and carefully unpinned the tiny guard's hat from Brave's ear. With solemn concentration, she pinned it to Tom's hospital gown, right over his heart. "There," she said decisively. "Now you have some of his Brave magic too." Tom touched the small pin, speechless with emotion. William placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, equally moved. Captain Harold, watching from across the room, discreetly wiped his eye. He'd seen many ceremonial exchanges in his military career, but none quite as meaningful as this simple pin passing between two cancer patients, one small and just beginning life, one young and with so much life ahead, both fighting the same enemy with the same courage. Sophie's mother approached, introducing herself to Tom and William's parents. Soon the two families were talking like old friends, sharing stories of hospital stays and treatment schedules, of small victories and difficult days. They exchanged phone numbers, promising to keep in touch, to support each other through whatever came next. "Isn't it strange," Elizabeth said to Tom and William's mother, "how one small moment can connect people who might never have met otherwise?" As the families talked, Sophie and Tom compared their hospital bracelets and shared stories about their favorite nurses. Despite their age difference, they found common ground in their experiences: the strange hospital food, the boring days of waiting, the nights when it was hard to be brave. William watched them, still in his formal uniform but feeling more human than he ever had on duty. Sometimes, he realized, the most important connections happen when we break character, when we set aside who we're supposed to be and simply become who we need to be in that moment. The summer sun shone brightly over London as crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Everyone was eager to see the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among them stood little Sophie Taylor, just 8 years old, holding her favorite teddy bear tightly. Her head was wrapped in a colorful scarf that hid the effects of her recent chemotherapy treatments. "Stay close, Sophie," her dad James said, keeping a protective hand on her shoulder. This trip was a special reward after Sophie had bravely completed her first round of cancer treatments. Her mom Elizabeth snapped photos as Sophie watched the red-uniformed guards with wide-eyed wonder. "They never move, not even a little bit," Sophie whispered to her teddy bear, amazed by the guard's stillness. Standing perfectly straight at his post was William Thornton, a guard with 7 years of service. Under his tall bearskin hat, William's face revealed nothing, though his mind was far from empty. Just last week, he'd learned his younger brother had leukemia. Each day on duty since had been a struggle to maintain the perfect discipline the Queen's Guard was famous for. As the ceremony continued, Sophie stretched to see better. Her small fingers loosened their grip, and her beloved teddy bear slipped from her hands. It tumbled beyond the rope barrier, landing just inches from William's polished black boots. "My bear," Sophie cried out, but her parents held her back from crossing the barrier. The crowd went quiet. Everyone knew the guards never broke character, no matter what happened around them. Sophie's eyes filled with tears as she stared at her comfort toy lying on the ground. William heard the little girl's cry. From the corner of his eye, he could see the teddy bear. For a moment, he remained perfectly still, as years of training demanded. But then he noticed something else, the hospital bracelet around Sophie's wrist. It was identical to the one his brother now wore. Something shifted inside William. In a move that made tourists gasp, he broke his stance. The guard who had withstood rain, heat, and countless distractions bent down and picked up the teddy bear. As William turned and handed the toy back to Sophie, their eyes met. Her smile reminded him so much of his brother that his usually stern face softened. He noticed her hospital bracelet and recognized the name of the same children's cancer ward where his brother received treatment. "Thank you, sir," Sophie said, her face lighting up as she hugged her bear. William gave her the smallest nod and a hint of a smile before returning to his position. The crowd erupted in applause and phone cameras captured the moment from every angle. By evening, videos of William's small act of kindness had spread across the internet. Palace officials initially prepared to discipline him for breaking the strict protocol, but as Sophie's story became known, public support for William grew overwhelming. "He made my daughter's day," James told reporters. "What these guards represent is important, but so is showing children that kindness matters." What no one knew until later was that Sophie's teddy bear was her courage bear, given to her on her first day of treatment. She took it to every hospital visit, just as William's brother had his own comfort toy. William's commanding officer, after learning the full story, arranged for William and his brother to meet Sophie at the children's hospital where both children received treatment. The meeting was filled with tears and laughter as the two young patients compared notes on brave teddy bears and hospital food. "Your brother is my hero," Sophie told William's brother as they colored pictures together. "He's even braver than my teddy." The royal family, touched by what had happened, started a special program called Guards of Courage, where off-duty guardsmen visited sick children. William, now sometimes assigned to this duty, remained humble about what he had done. "Some moments ask us to be human first, soldier second," William said when asked about that day. 6 months later, both Sophie and William's brother showed good signs in their treatment. The palace quietly updated their rules, giving guards permission to help children in special cases, a reminder that sometimes breaking character shows the greatest strength of all. The story of the guard and the teddy bear became a favorite at the children's hospital. Nurses would tell new patients about the day when one of the famously unmoving royal guards proved that kindness matters more than rules, and how sometimes the biggest hearts hide behind the sternest faces.